Anne Frank's attic. For those of you who don't know, Anne Frank was a German-born Jewish girl who kept a diary in which she documented life in hiding from 1942 to 1944 during the German occupation of the Netherlands in World War II. She wrote every day in her diary about her life from her family's hiding place in an Amsterdam attic. Her diary was eventually published, and it's now one of the world's best-known books. Now, this photo is not of Anne, but of her father, Otto, in 1960, revisiting the attic where the family hid. He was the sole survivor of his family, so I can't imagine the pain he had revisiting this place. Later, the photographer Arnold Newman recalled taking this photo. He said, "The mood was depressing and I immediately began photographing him. After a few moments, the Westertoren bells next door began to ring. Those were the bells that Anne wrote about. He suddenly broke down completely, weeping uncontrollably, and then so did I. We never met again. To this day, when I lecture or tell his story to people, I find I choke up. I still can't help myself." Number 9. An inmate at the Rab camp. The Rab camp was one of several Italian concentration camps, and it was established during World War II in July 1942 on the Italian-occupied island of Rab, now in Croatia. Estimates of the Commission for Determining the Crimes of the Occupiers say 4,641 detainees died at the camp, including 800 inmates who died while being transported from Rab to other concentration camps in Italy. In July 1943, after the fall of the fascist regime in Italy, the camp was closed, but some of the remaining Jewish prisoners were deported by German forces to the extermination camps. Under Italian Army Commander Mario Rotatta's watch, the ethnic cleansing and violence committed against the Slovene civilian population included summary executions, hostage-taking and ending the hostages' lives, reprisals, and the burning of houses and villages. Slovenes and Croatians suffered from cold and hunger in open-air tents, surrounded by barbed wire fence and guarded towers. At its peak, there were up to 15,000 internees. Conditions at the camp were described as appalling, filthy, muddy, overcrowded, and swarming with insects. This photo just shows how much suffering they went through. Number 8. A jail cell from the Salem witch trials. This makeshift jail cell truly brings out the horrors of the Salem witch trials. These trials were a series of hearings and prosecutions of people accused of witchcraft in colonial Massachusetts between February 1692 and May 1693. More than 200 people were accused, 30 people were found guilty, 19 of whom were executed by hanging. Now, women vastly outnumbered men in the ranks of accused and executed. It was in cells like this one that the accused witches spent their final moments before being executed. Now, it's just sad because we all know that this was just a scare and that they weren't real witches. Many of these women were suspected and chosen because they were simply unliked. Number 7. Pyramids on the Moon. In 1972, this image was taken by Apollo 17 during its flight to the moon near an area known as Geophone Rock. NASA listed the image as blank, but after retouching the photo, you can see that it's not completely blank. Turning up the contrast, a pyramidal structure can be seen. So, what is it? Was it some malfunction of the camera, or is there actually a pyramid on the moon? NASA has never given a credible version of the issue, which has led to some speculations about what actually can be on the moon, hidden from the public. And listen, not to be a crazy conspiracy theorist, but maybe it is true that aliens built the pyramids on Earth as they look like they did it on the moon too. I don't know, but it gives you a lot to think about. While this eye looks like it may belong to a scary monster, it's actually a human eye. While rummaging through photographs that captured the devastating impact of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki, this photo emerged. On the 6th and 9th of August 1945, the United States detonated 2 atomic the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, respectively. The aerial bombings together ended the lives between 129,000 and 226,000 people. People, most of whom were civilians. When the bomb detonated at 1,900 feet above the city center of Hiroshima, the subsequent explosion caused temperatures of 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit to annihilate nearly everything within 1,600 feet of blast zone. Almost anything and anyone within a mile was destroyed. and heat were so extreme that they bleached the city's exposed surfaces, except in places where an unsuspecting person shielded the building or sidewalk or bridge from the blast with their own body in their final moments alive. Now, this is what the eye of an victim plagued by an atomic rack looks like. While it had been a well-known fact that radiation causes cataracts in animals, the development of atomic cataracts in human beings was noted after the atomic in Japan. Now, it wasn't just this person who suffered from this, but many others as well. Number 5. The Babushka Lady. The woman in the brown coat, or the Babushka Lady as she was later called by the FBI, was very close to JFK when he was assassinated in Dallas. Traveling in a presidential motorcade through downtown Dallas, JFK was assassinated, hit once in the back and once in the head. Kennedy was taken to Parkland Hospital for emergency medical treatment, where he was pronounced dead 30 minutes later. Now, Lee Harvey Oswald was charged with Kennedy's assassination. He denied. Oswald then was as well soon after. These theories allege the involvement of the CIA, the Mafia, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, Cuban Prime Minister Fidel Castro, the KGB, or some combination. Now, according to eyewitnesses though, this woman, the Babushka Lady, filmed the entire thing. It's thought that from her vantage point, she may have been able to answer some critical questions about what really happened that day. However, the FBI was never able to track her down, and no one has since been able to figure out the identity of this mystery observer. Number 4. Human zoos. Yes, you might have thought that zoos were strictly for animals, but once upon a time there were human zoos, which I personally find disgusting. Now, this photo was taken in 1904, where the US government imported 1,300 indigenous Filipinos from different tribes to display at the St. Louis Exposition in 1904. Yeah, you heard that right. The government did this, but are we really that surprised? The zoos were public displays of people, usually in so-called natural or primitive state, to be seen and gawked at. These zoos were most prominent during the 19th and 20th centuries, and in the 1870s, exhibitions of so-called exotic populations became popular throughout the Western world. Human zoos could be seen in many of Europe's largest cities, such as Paris, Hamburg, London, Milan, as well as American cities such as New York City and Chicago. These people were zoo attractions among the monkeys and lizards to show off the new US possessions. These people were often bound by ropes and visitors threw peanuts at them. The treatment of these human beings was just awful. Number 3. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. The Dyatlov Pass incident was an event in which 9 Soviet hikers died in the northern Ural Mountains between February 1st and 2nd, 1959, under uncertain circumstances. This creepy photo shows the determined group traversing the harsh terrain just before they met their fate on the night of February 1st. The experienced trekking group from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, led by Igor Dyatlov, had established a camp in the Russian SFSR of the Soviet Union. Now, overnight, something caused them to cut their way out of their tent and flee the campsite while inadequately dressed for the heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures. Now, after the group's bodies were discovered, an investigation by Soviet authorities determined that 6 of them had died from hypothermia, while the other 3 had died by physical trauma. One victim had major skull damage, 2 had severe chest trauma, and another had a small crack in his skull. 4 of the bodies were found lying in running water in a creek, and 3 of those 4 had damaged soft tissue of the head and face. 2 of the bodies had missing eyes, 1 had a missing tongue, and 1 had missing eyebrows. Number 2. Treatment of a patient with mental illness. This 1890 photo depicts a woman forced into a crucifixion pose and facing a wall. The woman is a patient at a mental institution undergoing treatment. Now, believe it or not, forced standing was considered a legitimate part of treatment for mental illness in 19th century Germany. Now, back in the 18th and early 20th century, women were sometimes institutionalized due to their opinions and their inability to be controlled properly by a primarily male-dominated culture. There were financial incentives too, because before the passage of the Married Women's Property Act 1882, all of a wife's assets passed automatically to her husband. The men who were in charge of these women, either a husband, father, or brother, could send these women to mental institutions, stating they believed that these women were mentally ill because of their strong opinions. These men had the last say when it came to the mental health of these women, so if they believed that these women were mentally ill, or if they simply wanted to silence the voices and opinions of these women, they could easily send them to mental institutions. This is what could have happened to this woman in that photograph. Now, besides standing, practices at these asylums were dark, as they had treatments that included restraints, isolation, electroshock therapy, ice baths, forced drugging, and even lobotomies. And coming in at number 1 is mustard gas tested on American military. Mustard gas is a type of chemical warfare agent, and as a chemical weapon, mustard gas was first used in World War I. In 1943, the US Navy exposed its own sailors to mustard gas. Now, officially, the Navy was testing the effectiveness of new clothing and gas masks against the deadly gas that had proven so terrifying in the First World War. Young men were approached after 8 weeks of boot camp and asked if they wanted to participate in an experiment that would help shorten the war. Obviously, they said yes, but they didn't know what they were signing up for. Only when the boys reached the research laboratory were they told the experiment involved mustard gas. Now, the participants, almost all of whom suffered several external and internal burns, were ignored by the Navy and in some cases were threatened with the Espionage Act. In 1991, the reports were finally declassified and taken before Congress.
The first image is a screen grab from a video filmed by a US Marine officer on the 20th of April in 2021 on a military base in 29 Palms, California. After the release of the photograph, multiple Marines came forward to confirm the existence of an aircraft, saying that while the photo showcases only the triangle-shaped formation of bright lights, in person the men were able to make out the black body of the aircraft as well. The unidentified flying object is said to have hovered for 10 minutes in the air before it suddenly vanished without any trace. The men were able to rule out flares for being the cause of the mysterious lights, but were never able to figure out exactly what they saw that night. However, it appears the footage has not been taken lightly, as the Pentagon has started an investigation into just what exactly was seen on the night of April 20th of 2021 in the skies above the 29 Palms military base. Next up, we have a series of photographs taken by cosmonaut Ivan Vanger in August of 2020 whilst aboard the International Space Station that appears to depict 5 unidentified flying objects flying at the same speed while maintaining the same distance between each other as well as their surroundings, moving in a straight line just above the Earth's curved horizon visible in the night sky. Vangar, both surprised and curious, took to Twitter, now named X, to share the footage in hopes of getting some clarity as to exactly what he was looking at. In an exciting unfolding of events, his tweet was picked up by the Russian space agency Roscosmos, and a spokesperson revealed that experts were in fact studying the video in an attempt to determine what exactly Vangar had managed to capture. Did you guys know that Japan was a major hotbed for UFO activity? Because I didn't. But apparently the Pentagon does? In fact, UFO sightings are so common in Japan that its military has reportedly ordered all pilots to disclose any and all identified flying objects directly to the Japanese government. Not only that, but Japanese self-defense forces have also undergone extensive training in relation to UFO sighting protocol. To date, 6 alleged encounters between pilots and UFOs have been reported to the Japanese government, one of which was recorded, and depicts 10 white circular balls flying through the skies of Osaka in Japan. While the government has yet to publicly comment on any of the incidents, the update of self-defense protocol alone is pretty telling. The next image was shared by a pretty reputable source, National Geographic. The image was captured by Sergio Loaiza on September 4th of 1971 during an aerial survey of Lake Kote. Everything seemed pretty normal until the photos were taken back to Loaiza's development lab, where he noticed something very strange. A metallic flying aircraft, estimated to have a diameter of 160 feet, was located in the corner of one of the photographs. When he presented the photos to his superiors at the National Geographic Institute, they shut him down quick, forbidding Sergio as well as his colleagues from sharing any information of what they had seen that day. In 1979, however, the photograph was leaked, and the object that appeared in the image was officially classified as an unidentified flying object. In 2021, the existence of the object was again confirmed after the original copy of the photograph was scanned, and it was revealed that the UFO's presence was more than just a scratch on the lens or a piece of dust in the wind. So what do you think it was? Let us know in the comments. Next up, we have footage that comes to us straight from the declassifieds. Remember how I told you at the beginning of the video that the government quite literally copped to the fact that they have been hiding the existence of UFOs for years? Well, they did, and they came with receipts. On the 15th of January in 2023, while surveilling an MQ-9 Reaper aircraft, an unidentified aerial presence was captured moving at speeds unreachable by any of Earth's modern-day technological advances. Not only this, but as the object whizzed through the field of view of the camera lens, it appeared to leave behind an atmospheric wake before disappearing completely into the sky. Guys, if you have any, please leave your UFO and alien stories in the comments. I would love to hear about your experiences with any of these kind of things. Next up, we have arguably the most beautiful alien-assuming photograph I have ever seen. The photo was taken in 2004 by a retired Royal Air Force officer while on vacation in Sri Lanka. The site was described as some kind of colorful giant donut in the sky with hues of oranges, pinks, purples, and whites. After its capture, the photograph was turned into the Royal Air Force Flying Dales Base in North Yorkshire in England, where it became a classified document held by the Ministry of Defense. The image has since been declassified, of course, and is now available for public viewing, but there is still a lot of mystery surrounding the photo as well as the photographer, as his identity, along with any other information regarding the incident, is pretty much non-existent. I mean, come on, it's a giant glowing light in the sky. You're really telling me no one else saw this and that there's no other information out there other than the fact that the photo exists? Oh, yeah, and not only that, but it was deemed classified by the British Ministry of Defense, so I'm thinking there's something else going on here. Okay, I bet you didn't know that another major hotbed for extraterrestrial, UFO, and unidentified aerial phenomenon activity was Brazil. I mean, I did, but maybe you didn't. In fact, this kind of thing is so popular in Brazil that they have an annual day of recognition for these sightings known as the Night of the UFO, which came to be after a major event took place in 1986. On the night of May 19th, a series of unidentified flying objects were seen in the skies of Brazil, and even more non-visual objects were detected via radar across the skies of 4 Brazilian states. Of course, at this time, any and all knowledge the government had on the event was extremely classified. In May of 2012, however, Brazil's Freedom of Information Act went into place, after which the public demanded the release of all the documents relating to the incident. The government complied, and not only released written documents of the events, but also a series of photographs depicting strange activity within the skies above Brazil. Although the images of what appeared to be nothing more than squiggles and clouds of smoke didn't provide much clarity, a statement made by the Minister of Aeronautics did. He said, "This command is of the opinion that the phenomena are solid and reflect, in a certain way, intelligence, due to the ability to follow and maintain a distance from observers, as well as to fly information." After this statement was made, the Brazilian government has still not been able to confirm exactly what took place the day the Night of the UFOs was born. Next, we have a photo taken in 1990 by 2 Scottish chefs who were working in a hotel near the area in which the photograph was taken. After a long day of work, it appears the 2 men had decided to take a hike in an attempt to blow off some steam. While this walk wouldn't end up being incredibly relaxing, it would be wildly exciting, as not long after the 2 men had set off on their journey along the Calvine Scottish countryside, they noticed something hovering above them in the sky. The object was not one that either of the men could identify, and so they pulled out their cameras in an attempt to document the 100-foot flying aircraft instead. The photos, which have been analyzed and show no signs of manipulation, capture the object being circled by a jet plane. They thought the incident was incredibly strange and even newsworthy, so the 2 turned the footage over to the local newspaper for publication, but the images were seized by the British Ministry of Defense and were never released. Until 32 years later, that is, by David Clark, who, unbeknownst to the ministry, had kept a photocopy of one of the original images. The identity of the 2 men was never revealed, nor did they ever come forward to share their story after the images had been seized by the ministry, begging the question of what exactly they saw and what exactly the government was trying to cover up. A photograph taken of an unidentified aircraft lit up by military spotlights in Los Angeles, California, is next on the list. The photograph, which documents an event so big it later became referred to as the Battle of Los Angeles, Angeles or the Great Los Angeles Air Raid was taken on February 23rd of 1942, just 2 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor. On the night the photo was taken, all of Los Angeles was under blackout, as directed by the US military. While the lights on the ground had been turned off, the sky above had been lit up by a myriad of strange objects. The military opened fire, and onlookers stood absolutely stunned as 1,400 rounds of ammunition appeared to have no effect on the unidentified flying object. Smoke filled the sky, and when it cleared, not a single craft was to be found in the sky or on the ground. Shrapnel that appeared to have ricocheted off the target resulted in the death of 5 civilians. Furthermore, 3 were killed in car accidents due to the chaos of the event, and 2 more of heart attacks due to the stress of the 2-hour-long attack. And finally, we have a handful of screen grabs from a video taken by Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich whilst flying an 18F Super Hornet fighter jet over the Pacific Ocean near San Diego during a training mission for the United States Navy. The footage, taken in November of 2004, was captured after Dietrich was asked to investigate a suspicious object that had been seen dropping from 80,000 feet down to the surface of the ocean and then vanishing. When Alex and their colleague arrived on the scene, the ocean's surface, where the object had been reported, appeared as though it was boiling. Moments after arriving to investigate, a strange, elongated white object came into view and was captured on video hovering above the water before it disappeared into the sky at an impossible speed, leaving no wake in the oceans below. While the footage has been confirmed to be authentic by the United States Department of Defense, the object itself, along with its origins, remains a mystery.
We're going to start off the list with this image here. This is not one of those niche taxidermy pieces. This is indeed a living 2-headed dog, pieced together by a mad scientist. Vladimir Demikov was a scientist from the Soviet Union who did some really questionable stuff back in the 50s. He came up with this strange idea of attaching the head of one dog onto another, creating a 2-headed dog. Now why? Well, he wanted to figure out more about organ transplants and see how the body would react to these surgeries. From a pure scientific perspective, what he did was kind of a big deal. It was about pushing the limits of what doctors could do back then. But is it incredibly creepy and unethical? Absolutely. This sparked a huge ethical debate. It seemed like some bizarre freak show rather than an ethical scientific pursuit, and people got pretty upset about it. Playing around with life like that, creating these weird creatures just for the sake of curiosity, it didn't sit well with a lot of folks, and unsurprisingly, the dogs didn't live very long after these experiments. So while Demikov's work was kind of groundbreaking, it was also just downright cruel. You know what's downright cruel to us is if you don't subscribe to this channel. I mean, what are you waiting for? It's free. We got awesome videos coming your way on the daily, so don't miss out. Hit that button down below. Next up, we have this image here of Captain Robert Falcon Scott and his team of explorers after finally reaching the South Pole. It had been a long, grueling, treacherous expedition, and they'd arrived only to find out that a Norwegian team of explorers had beaten them to the punch. Not only were these men now exhausted, starving, and frostbitten, but they wouldn't even be remembered as the team to reach the South Pole first, and now they had to make the long return trip back to base camp. You can see how miserable and distraught they all look here, not to mention very unwell. Definitely frostbitten. Tragically, the team would never make it home alive. The weather was harsh, they were already suffering from exhaustion, and they were running out of supplies. The first member of the team to pass was Edgar Evans, who died on February 17th of 1912. Then Lawrence Oates willingly walked out into a blizzard, ending his own life. Scott, along with Edward Wilson, Henry Bowers, and Edgar Evans, kept going, but things got worse. The storm ended up trapping them in their tent for 9 whole days, and they couldn't move. They died in the tent, just 11 miles away from where they could get more supplies. This is a photograph taken in 1986 of what were known as the Chernobyl liquidators. See those white stripes, the patterns at the bottom of this photo? That was caused by radiation on the film. The Chernobyl liquidators were a group of people who were called in to clean up the mess after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986. Their job was to try and make things safer for dealing with the radioactive contamination. These were regular folks, soldiers, firefighters, and other workers who faced really dangerous conditions to help control the aftermath. These workers had to deal with high levels of radiation, and many of them got sick later on due to exposure. They didn't have fancy gear like we might see today. In fact, there wasn't even enough protective equipment for everyone, so some of them had to construct their own out of leather and lead plates. It was an incredibly tough and risky job, and they faced severe health consequences because of it. Some, of course, even died because of the exposure. Alright, this is a pretty famous photograph in the world of paranormal photography, and for good reason. This picture has a pretty chilling tale behind it. It's a very classic kind of ghost story. Back in 1924, during a routine voyage, tragedy struck the SS Watertown when two crew members, James Courtney and Michael Meehan, lost their lives and were buried at sea. Two men had been sent to the ship's interior cofferdam to clean and do repairs, but they were unaware there was poisonous gas leaking into the area they were working in, and they died inhaling the fumes. What followed was this series of events that would go down in maritime history as one of the eeriest tales ever told by seafarers. After the burial, the remaining crew reported an unsettling sight. They claimed to see ghostly faces appearing in the water alongside the ship, and the faces looked just like Courtney and Meehan. One crew member managed to snap the famous photo that is now infamous, seemingly revealing their ghostly faces in the water. Alright, want to see part of the underground hideout of a Russian doomsday cult? Well, you're looking at it. This is one of those images you can kind of smell just by looking at. Never a good thing. Pyotr Kuznetsov led a strange group called the True Russian Orthodox Church, and in 2007 he convinced his followers to barricade themselves inside a cave. Kuznetsov wasn't with them because police had him in custody. He claimed to be a prophet, combining Christian teachings with visions of the world ending. So why did they hide in a cave? Well, they genuinely thought the world was about to end, and by shutting themselves away, they believed they could shield themselves from the apocalypse. The police found out where the cave was, but the people inside threatened to harm themselves if the police tried to step in, and after a few months, yes, months, spent in that cave, the Russian security forces finally stepped in. Two members had actually already died in the cave and were creating dangerous fumes for the folks that were still alive. Awful. Eventually, though, they were hauled out of there. Does this look like a place you'd want to spend the night in? Probably not. It's run down, clearly abandoned. It'd probably be squatters, and there's no furniture. But even worse than all of that, this is said to be one of the most haunted places in Italy. In the quiet village of Cona stands an abandoned house known as Villa Magnoni, left vacant and untouched now for many years. Its windows, aside from one, are completely sealed up. Back in the late 80s, a group of curious young men decided to venture into this abandoned mansion. They actually managed to break in, but once inside, they heard something. It was the distant sound of children singing. At least that's what it sounded like, and it was seemingly coming from the garden. They went outside to investigate, but when they got there, it was completely empty. As they were looking around, an old woman suddenly appeared in the window above them in the house. She scolded and insulted them, demanding they leave the premises immediately. The teenagers did the smart thing and hastily booked it out of there, but just after they'd hopped into their car and began peeling off, they got into an accident. 3 of them ended up losing their lives in the crash, leaving only one survivor. In the aftermath, the villagers took the precautions and sealed off all the windows of Villa Magnoni, believing someone or something dark was lingering inside the property. Weeks later, they discovered that the covering on one specific window, the very one where the old woman had appeared to scold and curse the boys, was mysteriously uncovered. This is one of the last photos taken of the Apollo 1 crew on the day a deadly fire erupted during a pre-launch test. All 3 astronauts lost their lives. On January 27th of 1967, during a pre-launch test for the Apollo program, the crew of Apollo 1, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee were conducting a test at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The spacecraft was mounted on its launch vehicle. The purpose of the test was to check the spacecraft's systems and conditions simulating a launch, with external power sources disconnected. During the test, though, the crew encountered an issue. A fire broke out in the pure oxygen environment of the command module's cabin. The fire spread incredibly fast because of the highly flammable materials that were used at the time to construct the spacecraft. This is one of the last known photographs taken of a man named Michael Rockefeller, the son of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, who never returned home from an expedition to Dutch New Guinea, now part of Indonesia, in 1961. Michael was on a mission to study the Asmat people, an indigenous tribe known for their unique art and customs, and while on an art collecting expedition along the coast, Michael's boat capsized. He and a fellow explorer, Rene Wassing, tried to swim to the shore, which was about 12 miles away, but Wassing eventually became too exhausted, and Michael decided he was going to continue swimming alone, hoping to reach help. But Michael would never be seen again. Now, the famous theory is that the very tribe seen with him in this photograph ate him. Now, although cannibalism was still a bit of a thing in some areas of Asmat at the time, there's not a whole lot of evidence for that. It just makes for a sensational kind of story. There's another possibility that he was attacked by sharks or just succumbed to exhaustion. This is a photograph taken inside Waverly Hills Sanitarium in Kentucky, a hospital that became famous for treating patients suffering from tuberculosis. So yeah, a lot of people died there. It opened in 1910 to treat people with the deadly lung disease. Back then, there wasn't a cure for tuberculosis, so the sanitarium focused on providing fresh air and sunlight, thinking it might help patients get better. As the years went by, better treatments for tuberculosis came along, and the need for places like Waverly Hills decreased. The sanitarium eventually closed in 1961. After that, it went through various uses. It was an old folks' home for a short time. Nothing really stuck, though. Now, what makes Waverly Hills famous, or maybe infamous, is its reputation for being very haunted. Over the years, people started to tell stories about strange things happening there. Glowing orbs, the sounds of disembodied coughs, footsteps making their way down the empty halls. One of the most famous stories is about a ghostly figure named Timmy. According to the tale, Timmy was a little boy who stayed at Waverly Hills and died there. People claim to have heard a child's laughter and seen a shadowy figure resembling a young boy. Because of all these stories, Waverly Hills has become pretty popular for ghost hunters. There have even been TV shows and documentaries filmed there. And finally, we have Mayenga Nasaka. Mayenga Nasaka was a nurse in Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, during a scary time in 1976, the Ebola outbreak. This photo captures one of the last moments of her life. Mayenga got infected with the Ebola virus while she was working at Mambalat Hospital in Kinshasa. She was caring for a nun who'd been brought in from Yambuku Mission Hospital where the outbreak started. The thing is, Mayenga's case became kind of famous because she was one of the first healthcare workers to get sick during the outbreak. In the picture, you can see her standing next to another nurse taking care of a patient, but here's the heartbreaking part. Just a few days after this photo was taken, Mayenga passed away. Hospital staff didn't have the right gear to protect themselves, and there weren't enough precautions to stop them from coming into contact with patients' blood or fluids. This was the very early stages of the outbreak, and people didn't know how dangerous the virus really was at the time.
First on the list, we have Siegfried Fischbacher, born in Bavaria, Germany on June 13th, 1939, and Roy Horn, born in Oldenburg, Germany on October 3rd, 1944. However, the pair were more commonly known as simply Siegfried and Roy. If you haven't heard of them, or if you have and you just can't quite place where the name comes from, the dynamic duo are most well known for their time spent headlining the stages of Vegas, presenting their magic act to huge crowds of adoring fans. That is, of course, until the day this photo was taken, on October 3rd of 2003. In an effort to push themselves and their act to the next level, the pair had decided to bring in a third. No, not a third person, but a 400-pound, 7-foot-long Siberian tiger, affectionately referred to as Manticore. Well, actually, Roy had adopted the tiger as a cub, but by the time the incident occurred, it was massive. On the night of October 3rd in 2003, the trio was ready to go and began their performance under the bright lights of the big city. But unfortunately, the performance was cut short, as just minutes after this picture was taken, Manticore began to stray away from his performance, seemingly interested in the person sitting in the front row of the show. Roy placed himself between the giant animal and the crowd, commanding the tiger to turn around and go back to the act, but instead the animal refused. An altercation began, during which the tiger clamped its jaws forcefully around Roy's neck and dragged him 30 feet off stage as the crowd watched in horror. Eventually, they were able to remove the animal, and Roy did later recover from his injuries, but unfortunately the show did not. Roy maintained that the tiger did not attack him, but instead that the performer had suffered a stroke and that the animal's only intention was to bring him to safety. Next, we have the final moments of Carl Williams, depicted in a CCTV screen grab moments before his death. Williams, born October 13th of 1970, was a convicted killer and an illicit substance distributor from Melbourne, Australia. He had one wife, one child, and a brother. In 2007, Carl Williams was convicted of 3 killings as well as the illicit trafficking, and was later sentenced to serve 2 consecutive life sentences for his crimes in Barwon Prison in Victoria, Australia, with a 35-year period in which he would not be eligible for parole. His sentence was, however, cut short, as on April 19th of 2010, as Williams started reading the paper, he met the beginning of his end. It seems a fellow inmate by the name of Matthew Charles Johnson, seen in the photograph approaching from behind, holding the stem of an exercise bike, had discovered that Williams had been snitching to the officers, and he was not happy. With the same exercise bike stem, he beat Williams, who died of his injuries. The last photo of Lady Diana, along with her partner Dottie Fade and driver Henry Paul, is next on the list. The former princess, born July 1st of 1961 in Norfolk, United Kingdom, lived to be just 36 years old before she met her end in a car crash on August 31st, 1997. There have been multiple theories as to what caused the crash that took the lives of Diana, Fade, and Paul, but the 3 most popular are probably that it was 1, an accident caused by paparazzi flash blinding the driver, causing him to crash; 2, that the driver Henry Paul had been struggling with substance abuse and lost control of the vehicle due to being under the influence; and 3, that the crash was a cover-up constructed by the royal family after the separation of Diana and former prince, now King, Charles. It has been speculated that Lady Diana was survived by a daughter she had previously hidden from the public, but this was never confirmed. Even after her death, many continued to recognize her regality, with a large amount of the British population even affectionately referring to the maiden as the People's Princess. Next, we have Jane Wicker, the plane dancer, also known as the ballerina in the sky. At the age of 44, Jane was at the top of the game in the extreme sport of wing-walking Daredevil entertainment. On the 22nd of June in 2013, the mother of 2, along with her pilot, Charlie Schweckner, made their ascent in a small 50 HP Stearman airplane for what they believed would be nothing more than a routine act. But unfortunately, that was not the case. Things took a dark turn when the aircraft seemingly stalled in the air before plummeting and crashing on the ground, with the pilot at the wheel and Wicker on the wing. Upon impact, the plane burst into flames and the pair were killed instantly. Schwenker, the veteran pilot, had been flying for the Circus Air Show since 1990, 23 years, and Wicker was survived by her 2 sons and fiance. Up next, at our halfway point, we have the last ever photo taken of R. Bud Dwyer. The American politician, born November 21st of 1939, served as a member of the Pennsylvania State Senate from 1971 to 1981, and as a Pennsylvania treasurer from 1981 to 1987, during which time he was charged with 5 counts of mail fraud, 4 counts of racketeering, and 4 counts of perjury conspiracy to commit bribery. Later, in 1986, the disgraced politician was found guilty and convicted of 11 counts of conspiracy, mail fraud, perjury, racketeering, and accepting bribes. Dwyer's sentencing date was scheduled for January 23rd of the following year, but as you've probably guessed, he never made it to court. On January 22nd of 1987, just 1 day before Dwyer was scheduled to receive his sentence, he called for a news conference to be held in the Pennsylvania State Capitol building, as well as for said conference to be broadcasted live across the state, which it was. Reporters jumped at had the opportunity to have one final chance to question Dwyer before sentencing, but little did they know that this would be the last time anyone would ask Dwyer anything, as halfway through the broadcast, ex-treasurer reached into an envelope and pulled out a weapon and ended his life. The really sad part is that Dwyer had maintained that he was innocent throughout the entirety of his court case, and it was only after his death that it was discovered he'd been framed for the whole thing. Next up, we have a photograph depicting the final moments of two Dutch service technicians. On October 29th of 2013, the two men made their way up to the top of a turbine for some maintenance work, and when they arrived at the top, a fire broke out, blocking the only chance of escape for both Dan Kaus and Aaron Cortus. The two can be seen embracing between the two blades of the giant windmill just moments before they met their separate ends. One of the men decided to leap from the structure and was later found in a field below, and the other found inside the charred remains of the turbine when firefighters were eventually able to make it up to the scene of the fire. The two men were members of an incredibly close-knit village near Amersfoort in Netherlands, and their deaths are said to have caused a profoundly deep sense of mourning within the communities. The Hindenburg is next up on the list. Commonly confused for a blimp, the long airship was actually a conventional Zeppelin design, meaning that the Hindenburg contained an internal framework to maintain its shape, while blimps rely on only internal air pressure. The airship was the pride of 1937 Germany when it was launched on May 6th of that year, carrying 36 passengers and 61 crewmen. However, the joyous moment was short-lived, as not long after its ascent, the airship exploded, most likely due to a gas leak that caused hydrogen from the vessel to mix with the oxygen in the air, and a small spark created by nothing more than static electricity caused the Hindenburg to be engulfed in flames. Surprisingly, the accident only caused 36 fatalities compared to the 92 people on board, and considering the entire aircraft had been engulfed in flames. Of the deceased from the incident were 13 passengers, 22 crewmen aboard the ship, and 1 ground crew member. Starting off our top 3, we have a photograph of Lalisa de Sisa, the first to cross the finish line of the Boston Marathon on April 15th of 2013, winning him the gold medal. Just 2 hours later, explosions went off in the very spot where the photograph had been captured, taking the lives of 3 people and badly injuring another 300. A year later, in 2014, Lalisa decided to return his gold medal to the city. He had also privately given his racing bib to a woman who had lost her lower leg and her husband, who had also sustained serious injuries from the incident. The year following the attack, de Sisa returned to compete again in the Boston Marathon, saying that sports hold the power to unify and connect people all over the world, and that they should never be used as a battleground. He also wanted to show that he was not scared, and he did just that, as in his 2015 do-over, he won for a second time, finishing even faster than he did the previous year. Next up, we have an aerial view shot looking down on Hiroshima and its people just moments before the 5-ton nuclear weapon, nicknamed Little Boy, dropped from the Enola Gray airliner onto the town and its civilians, releasing an explosive force equal to 20,000 tons of TNT, causing mass catastrophic destruction and the instant deaths of an estimated 80,000 people, and the prolonged deaths of thousands more due to radiation poisoning. It has also been estimated that 90% of the city was wiped out that day, the 6th of August in 1994. And the attack was followed up just 3 days later when another atomic bomb, nicknamed Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki, releasing a similar explosive force, this one being equal to the force of 21,000 tons of TNT. And coming in at number 1, we have a photograph of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sofia Chotek, taken June 28th in 1914 of Sarajevo, Bosnia. Just moments after this photo was taken, the Archduke was assassinated directly in front of his wife by 19-year-old Bosnian Serb nationalist Gavrio Prinic. Although the Archduke, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was not the most popular royal at the time, what happened following his death was unprecedented global warfare, the war to end all wars, which would later come to be known as World War I. War was officially declared on July 28th of 1914 and lasted for 4 years, coming to an end on November 11th in 1918. But even after the Great War, as it has been referred to, was finished, the repercussions sent shockwaves throughout nations that extended into the Second even more devastating World War II.
Look at is this one here. On February 3rd of 1959, musicians J.P. Richardson, also known as the Big Bopper, Richie Valens, and Buddy Holly tragically died in a plane crash near Clear Lake, Iowa, in what is famously known as the day the music died. This is the last photo taken of the three before boarding their final flight. The musicians had been traveling on a small Beechcraft Bonanza airplane, chartered after their tour bus broke down. The plane, piloted by Roger Peterson, took off from the Mason City Municipal Airport en route to Hector Airport in Fargo, North Dakota. The weather conditions on the night of the crash were poor, with a combination of snow, sleet, and fog, and despite these conditions, the flight took off anyway. The plane crashed only a few minutes after takeoff, around 1 a.m., into a cornfield near Clear Lake. There were no survivors. If you like videos just like this, creepy paranormal stuff, cryptid stuff, ghost stuff, we got it all, so hit that subscribe button and don't miss out. Next on the list is the 1943 glider crash. This is the last photograph taken of William D. Becker, the former mayor of St. Louis, along with several other prominent men in the community, right after boarding a brand new Waco CG-4 glider, manufactured by William B. Robertson, also pictured here. This was going to be the first public demonstration of the aircraft taking flight. Spectators watched from Lampert St. Louis Airport as the men boarded the glider, and what they didn't know was that they were witnessing the last moments of these men's lives. The glider was taxied by a plane to a runway for takeoff. They took flight, and once ready to allow the glider to glide, the towing cable was released. Almost immediately after the glider was released, though, something terrifying happened. Its right wing completely snapped off. Now, a wing snapping off of an aircraft spells disaster no matter what type of aircraft it is, but keep in mind these gliders were engineless, created specifically for the war efforts to be released like this and then glide down, usually into enemy lines. So now, completely on its own and missing a wing, there was no way for it to make a safe landing. It just plummeted towards the earth, crashing into the ground. All 10 men aboard died on impact. Next up, we have the death of Robert Overacker. Robert Overacker was a daredevil from Camarillo, California. At 12:35 p.m. October 1st, he attempted to go over Niagara Falls on a jet ski with the intention of raising awareness about the homeless. And during his attempt, Overacker wore a life jacket and was carrying a flag promoting a charity for the homeless. He had also intended to deploy a parachute at the last moment to escape the fall, but the parachute didn't deploy and he plunged over the falls. This photo was taken just as he went over. He was only 39 years old. Number 7, George Mallory and Sandy Irvine. On June 8th, 1924, British mountaineers George Mallory and Andrew Sandy Irvine went missing on Mount Everest during their attempt to reach the summit. Mallory and Irvine were part of the British 1924 Mount Everest expedition led by General Charles Bruce. The pair were last seen by their fellow climber Noel Odell at an elevation of around 28,000 feet on the northeast ridge of the mountain. The weather on Everest that day was unstable, very overcast, with snow making for low visibility. After Mallory and Irvine failed to return to their camp, search parties were sent out, but no trace of them was found. Several expeditions in the following years attempted to locate Mallory and Irvine's remains and their camera, hoping to find clues about whether they reached the summit, but it wasn't until 1999 that Mallory's body was discovered on the north face of the mountain. The last photo snapped of them was taken by Noel Odell right before they began their ascent. Japan Airlines Flight 123, a Boeing 747, crashed on August 12th of 1985, taking the lives of 520 of the 524 people on board. The crash was caused by severe structural failure, which led to a rapid decompression and loss of control. The last photo recovered from the crash site was taken by one of the passengers on the flight. In the photo, passengers can be seen wearing oxygen masks. The accident was caused by the rupture of the aircraft's rear pressure bulkhead, which separated the pressurized cabin from the unpressurized tail section. The bulkhead had been improperly repaired after a tail strike incident 7 years earlier. And the failure of the rear pressure bulkhead led to a sudden and explosive decompression inside the cabin. Decompression caused damage to control cables and systems, making it almost impossible for the pilots to maintain control control of the plane. The craft eventually entered a rapid descent and crashed into a mountain range. There were actually more than 4 passengers who survived the initial crash, but they died after several hours waiting to be rescued. Japan Airlines Flight 123 crash is one of the deadliest single aircraft accidents in aviation history. Number 5, Snake Man. This is the last photo taken of Ali Khan Samsudin. He was known as the Snake King after he spent 12 hours a day for 40 days living with 400 cobras in a small room. He also stayed in a small glass enclosure with 6,000 scorpions for 21 days, earning him the title Scorpion King. His 2006 performance in Kuala Lumpur would sadly be his last, though. During his show, he was bitten by a king cobra, one of the deadliest snakes in the world, with venom powerful enough to take down a full-sized elephant in a matter of hours. Samsudin had been bitten before. He'd even suffered a couple cobra bites before and made it out alive, but this time he didn't recover. His condition just got worse and worse, and the Snake King died in the hospital 3 days later. Next, we have the last photo of Mayinga Naseka. Mayinga Naseka was a nurse in Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, during the 1976 Ebola outbreak. She contracted the Ebola virus while treating patients at Mambalad Hospital in Kinshasa. She caught the virus while treating a nun who had been flown in from Yambuku Mission Hospital, where the initial outbreak began. Nasaka's case became widely known as she was one of the earliest identified healthcare workers to be infected during the outbreak. And in this photo, you see her standing with another nurse tending to a patient. She died just a few days after this picture was taken. The nurses weren't given the proper protective equipment, and there hadn't been any proper precautions taken to prevent contact with the nun's blood or fluids, because at the time, it wasn't known just how deadly the virus really was. Next up, we have the 1961 US figure skating team. This is the last photo of the US figure skating team, which was taken at the airport shortly before they boarded Sabina Flight 548. In the photo, team members appeared in high spirits, smiling, posing for the camera. Little did they know that this would be the last moment captured before the tragic event that claimed their lives. On February 15th of 1961, Sabina Flight 548, a Boeing 707 aircraft crashed while attempting to land at Brussels Airport in Belgium. The plane was carrying the entire team along with coaches, officials, and other passengers. The crash resulted in the tragic loss of 72 people on board. The cause of the crash never been 100% determined, but the most likely cause was a failure in the plane's flap system combined with poor weather conditions. The pilot struggled to maintain control during the landing attempt, leading to the deadly accident. Alright, next up we have the last photo of Christopher McCandless. On September 6th, 1992, the decomposing body of Christopher McCandless was found in a bus he had been living in just outside of Denali National Park in Alaska. McCandless had embarked on a journey to leave civilization behind and live off the grid. He spent 113 days living off the land, using the bus as his shelter. His journal entries were discovered, and it was likely he died about 19 days before his body was discovered. After living in the bus for over 3 months, McCandless finally decided he was going to try and make his way back to civilization. But this was unfortunately not going to be as easy as he thought. The river he had crossed to reach the bus was now much higher and swifter than it was when he first ventured in. He decided to turn back, left an SOS note on the bus reading, "Attention possible visitors, SOS, I need your help. I'm injured, near death, and too weak to hike out. I'm all alone. This is no joke. In the name of God, please remain to save me. I'm collecting berries close by and shall return this evening. Thank you, Chris McCandless." McCandless succumbed to starvation while waiting for help that never arrived. When his body was discovered, he appeared extremely gaunt, reportedly weighing only around 60 pounds at the time of his death. And finally, we have Princess Diana. This photo was taken by paparazzi in August of 1997 in Paris. Pictured here is Princess Diana, Dottie Fade, her driver Henry Paul, and bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones, right before a fatal car accident. Rees-Jones was the only survivor. Princess Diana and Dottie Fade were in a romantic relationship. They had been vacationing together in the French Riviera when they were pursued by paparazzi. As they left the Ritz Hotel in Paris, their car was chased by paparazzi photographers on motorcycles trying to capture images of the couple. In the Pont d'Alma tunnel, the car lost control and slammed into a concrete pillar. The impact of the crash was severe, leading to the deaths of Princess Diana and the other two in the car. Of course, the bodyguard did survive though. The aggressive pursuit by the paparazzi was widely criticized. Some people blamed them for indirectly causing the accident due to their relentless chase, something that I definitely agree with. I hate paparazzi. Like, just come on, get a real job, honestly.
The reindeer gift. We'll turn the clocks back to 1941 right off the hop. When the Germans were attacking the Soviet Union, it was of course one of the biggest attacks in history. Britain and the United States had to send over weapons, supplies, anything really just to keep them afloat, just to keep them in the fight. Now they sent these supplies through the Arctic Circle, that was the only route, but of course it was littered with U-boats, you know, war stuff. So thankfully the British HMS Trident was there to watch the waters, and in turn the Soviets were able to fight on. As a gift, as a thank you rather, the Soviets sent the captain of the Trident, they sent him a live reindeer that the British of course had to accept because it was ill-mannered if you don't. So they had to keep a 6-foot tall, real-life living reindeer on a submarine. Must be comfortable, awesome. Imagine the smell. Her name was Pollyanna and they brought her on board through a torpedo tube. She was tiny, she's the cutest little thing. She was a crew member for 6 weeks, which is honestly hilarious because you know some of those guys got way too attached, you know for sure. She slept better than most, if I'm being honest. She shared her room in the captain's quarters. Again, imagine the smell. I don't know, is it worth it? I've always wanted a baby goat growing up, so this is kind of the closest thing. I'm jealous, I'm weirdly jealous. Number 9, Stalin Photoshop. Deep fakes are getting out of hand. I have no idea what's real or what's fake anymore. To be honest, I'm not even Taylor. I'm actually Olivia doing a list right now, but it's been deep faked so well that you believe it. Modern technology is really making it hard to tell what's real and what's not, but it goes back. Back in 1939, a photo of Stalin was published, and he looks normal. He actually looks kind of great. Some would say he looks way too good. You know what I mean? He was touching up photos as far back as 1939, just airbrushing, just digitally removing all those zits and stuff. Like, really? That far back? But even if you got a photo with Stalin, there's a chance that you yourself would be digitally removed. Like Nikolai Yevtsov, for example, the leader of the NKVD. He was in a photo with Stalin, but around 1937, Nikolai was responsible for orders that had over 1 million people arrested. So it wasn't ideal to be in a photo with Nikolai at the time. So he was denounced, imprisoned, and he died in 1940. So Stalin had him digitally erased and replaced in a photo. That's pretty hilarious. I don't know, this man was ahead of his time via Photoshop. How did he do it? How did they do it? No one knows. Number 8, Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. Nice, I remember this one. I heard about this on LimeWire. That was cool. Heard about that at full volume. This was a huge presidential scandal. Back when you know, didn't happen every other week and stuff, this was a big deal. It was 1998 and Clinton's White House intern Monica Lewinsky was 22 years old at the time. Yeah, young. When you think back to all this old history, you're like, oh, they were this. No, very young, extremely young. They had a from 1995 to 1997, despite what LimeWire told us. Lewinsky said she hooked up with Bill 9 different times at the White House, and apparently, according to her schedule, Hillary Clinton was at the White House for at least 7 of those times. She's like, what's going on in there, huh? Is that my... Who is that? Number 7, adhesive bras. We'll liven this up a little bit with some vintage history it's kind of funny. It's pretty funny. Let's talk about sticky bras, shall we? What a mess this was, oh my. Back in 1949, Life magazine released an article that caught everybody's attention, obviously. This was news, this was like a new technology that was being announced. It was May 16th, 1949, and the article read, for 5,000 years, clothes have been draped, tied, buttoned, pinned, and buckled on the human form. This year, for the first time in history, drumroll, they will be glued on. What in the world? How? This is witchcraft. How did that happen? Just 1, 2, that's it? That's easy. Inventor Charles Langs changed the game, or he thought he did, in 1949. He made these bra cups that would stick to you with adhesive. This, you know, special glue. This special glue. This specific adhesive was promised to leave behind no residue, it was supposed to be painless, yet at the same time stay glued on even if you were to jump into a pool from a 10-foot diving board. That was the sell. Yeah, well, that's not true. That's definitely not true. Well, Langs ended up selling the company to Textron later on, and the product ultimately failed. Number 6, nuclear site list. Alright, back to the dark stuff. Here on Most Amazing, we love lists, right? I'm not sure if you can tell. Smash that thumbs up, hit subscribe, yada yada, we love it. But apparently the US government also fancies a list or two. Who thought? Back when Obama was still running the show, a report was delivered to Congress, or rather it was supposed to be. The 266-page report featuring, every nook and cranny about the US nuclear program. It was released publicly on the government printing office's website in draft form. Draft form, couldn't have been easier, just a casual PDF that shows us maps with stockpiled fuel used for nuclear warheads. Awesome, right next to your resume. Imagine that, so convenient. How does this even happen? I thought this type of stuff could never happen, right? Well, MIT professor John M. Deutsch said that these screw-ups do of course happen and it's normal, and this one here isn't a serious breach. I mean, it certainly sounds serious, but okay. We'll just have to trust the government. Number 5, UFOs in the ocean. This video here was leaked in the last couple of years. You've probably seen it, hopefully not. This would be a great day. The footage itself was recorded in 2019 in San Diego. Now the Pentagon has since of course confirmed its authenticity, and the UAP, the unidentified aerial phenomenon here, is sphere-shaped and it's flying at extremely high speeds. There's no exhaust, no propulsion system whatsoever. It's just a metal ball whipping by San Diego, and now we're questioning our beliefs, so that's fun. The sphere vanished into the water afterwards, into the ocean, and then was never seen ever again. Number 4, radar footage. Now normally when we see leaked footage, be it of UAPs or leaked documents, whatever, it's always the worst quality. Like that one, not the best, right? Not quite 4K. It's hard to believe when military footage is poor quality, right? Like how can we see photos of black holes and not even have a photo of a UAP yet, right? What's going on here? Well, Jeremy Corbell, he's here to help. Jeremy? What if he just walked in? That would be crazy. He's not here. That's insane. Jeremy took to Twitter in May 2021 sharing footage of US Navy ships being swarmed by UFOs. Like more than one. Sorry, UAPs. We're not gonna call them that anymore. Now this time we have radar footage, and that's pretty sweet. That's different. It came from the Combat Information Center aboard the USS Omaha. The 46-second clip was originally recorded July 15th, 2019. You can even hear people in the background reacting to what's happening in real time. You hear panic in their voices. These military personnel in the background, you can overhear them talking about how fast the objects are moving on the radar. So, seems very believable this time, right? It's not just a grainy footage. It's like a live reaction kind of. And if he's spooked, we're spooked, right? Number 3, Watergate. I have to include Watergate, right? It's one of the biggest scandals in US history. Right in the middle of 1972, there were 5 men who were all arrested for breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. It was clear that they intended on bugging the place, right? It was fishy, it was obvious, they looked like and spy kids, right? They were up to no good. Now as the year went on, the election came closer and closer, and all of a sudden out of the woodwork comes this anonymous source who fed information to Washington Post that the Watergate bugging incident was a massive campaign of political spying and sabotage kicked off by none other than President Nixon himself. It was kicked off by his re-election and directed by officials of the White House. It was a whole planned thing. Now despite this information leak and it being reported to the news, Nixon was still re-elected. Now these men were clearly linked to a fundraising group for Nixon, but his administration just kept denying any involvement, right? That's the key. Deny, deny, deny. It wasn't until later that year in 1972 when reporters Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, they came forward and exposed everything. Now we got the truth. They exposed the administrator's role in the entire scandal, how they had an inside source, an FBI agent named Mark Felt. It was a whole thing. This ultimately led to Nixon resigning in 1974, the first ever president to do so. Yeah, that's how you know you got caught, when you have to resign. Know what I mean? Number 2, shadow brokers. Back in August 2016, a group named the Shadow Brokers were the talk of the town. And with that name, how can you not be, right? The shadow brokers would steal cyber weapons from an NSA hacking unit and then proceed to sell them online to the highest bidder. Now this sounds made up. This sounds like it's from a movie. This is crazy, right? Now these tools in question, these cyber weapons, they've been used by many countries and many not so great sounding schemes. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, you name it, these cyber attacks can happen anywhere, right? The 2019 ransomware cyber attack, that's one example. This incident was connected to the shadow brokers. So whoever this mysterious group is, it still remains a mystery and still sounds made up as shit. It sounds like a DC Comics villain. It's insane. And finally, number 1, motorized roller skates. we'll end on a fun one, because, you know, why not? This last one they've been working on for a very long time and we still can't crack it, right? This is the craziest thing I've ever seen working on this channel, so I gotta end with it. Motorized roller skates. What a nightmare this would be. Imagine if this worked out. Even Elon Musk would see this and be like, no, that's crazy. This photo was taken at the Sunoco station in Hartford, Connecticut. Now, context aside, this is an odd one. A guy with a briefcase is filling up at the gas station and he's wearing roller skates. That would look bad today. You would have SWAT teams rolling up if you saw that, right? It's 1956 and that futuristic looking man right there is Mike Dreschler. Now, at the time, he was working for a Detroit skate company, but he was very close to gas-powered skates. They would have cost around $250, which today is around $2,400. And its max speed was 17 miles an hour. Again, imagine that in the closing act of like a Mission Impossible movie. That's crazy. Now, obviously the public wasn't supposed to see this. They feared that it would encourage folks to get creative on their own and, you know, launch their way to work. So yeah, don't make rocket skates with gasoline. Thanks.
If you enjoyed this video about historical photos that you won't find in textbooks, then you'll for sure like this video next. It's about security threats that could end the world. That sounds stressful. Click the video now to find out more.